So America's got a new Trump-class battleship, and it's set to replace the replacement that hasn't yet been built. Now, we all know this Navy stuff is a little bit outside my wheelhouse, so today we're joined by Carter Johnson, the North American correspondent for navalnews.com, to talk through this new announcement. Carter goes into the expected timeline, what this signals for the direction of the Navy, and my favorite part, him ranting about how we need to focus first on bringing shipbuilding capabilities back to the United States. I genuinely didn't know how bad it was, so really insightful stuff from Carter there. Now, Carter's an incredible source on all things Navy related, so be sure to follow his work at navalnews.com and on X. Both will be linked in the description below. And with that, let's get to the conversation. All right, Carter, man, happy holidays, and thanks for taking the time out of your vacation to talk through this with us.
Yeah, it's been a crazy week, I think, with starting off the week with an announcement of this scale, not even in the White House, but in Palm Beach, was really a great start to my week. So I'm happy to discuss everything with you and try and get a lowdown on what's going on.
So I want to start real high level here. What was the announcement? We've got new ships coming, Trump-class ships, I think. Walk us through it.
Yeah, so Trump, a couple months ago, decided that a new initiative was needed to start building ships at a scale and pace that would kind of meet our rivals. So rivals, think China, Russia, countries that are working to build ships that are working together to advance their own, adversary fleets. And that initiative was Golden Fleet, which was announced a couple months ago and has kind of been culminating, finally working towards this large design that was unveiled this week, which is what we saw, the Trump-class battleship, what they're calling BBGX. And it's really a wrap-up of everything that they've been working on. So you've had the new frigate that was announced last week by the Secretary of the Navy, John Phelan, and now the BBGX, which will be the central design cruiser or battleship, as they want to call it, that will lead their own surface fleets or work alongside a carrier or conduct any sort of independent operations on their own. So that's kind of what this announcement was this week, a final reveal of what the Golden Fleet Initiative has been working towards.
You right there said it's a cruiser. They're calling it a battleship.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. So the design is very much similar to something we saw, 10, 20 years ago in the Future Cruiser, CGX. And that's a guided missile cruiser that was under development and was canceled by the Obama administration because of cost, scale, and kind of a need that wasn't really there with the counterterrorism mission that was very much front and center in the Department of Defense. The armament that we see on this ship is very similar, and it's very similar to even the future destroyer that this is replacing. So while they want to call it a battleship, and I understand why, especially with the size of it, it's very much reminiscent of those future cruisers that we saw 10, 15 years ago that were under development, and even some of the guided missile destroyers that were setting up and developing to replace what we have right now. So I understand calling it a battleship, and I understand the premise of it and why, but ultimately it is very much more like a cruiser or a large destroyer that we would see out of the U.S. Navy.
I'm not too fixated on some of the terms you're using here, but
okay.
I'm catching up on things. And
yeah.
You said something about this is the future destroyer that this is replacing. Does that mean that this is set to replace something that hasn't yet been built?
So yes, as a matter of fact, it's set to replace something that was very much heavy in development right now. DDGX, which is our future surface fleet guided missile destroyer, set to replace some of our older frontline destroyers that we have right now that recently got life extensions because of DDGX's own delays. It's now set to replace that program that multiple billions of dollars were invested into. They were starting to test the engines, some of the armaments, and now, yes, this BBGX is replacing that future destroyer, which has not been built yet. The design has not been finished, so now we're kind of moving from one future program all the way to another future program that will probably set back this timetable by 5, maybe more years. Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a future one for another future one that hasn't begun that might get... Actually, you know what? Good question. Will this get built? Like, what does this world look like? Is this?
I think that's a great question. Because
right,
there's been a lot of a lot of kind of what will this look like in 10 years from now when all of the contractors have finished their designs and construction starts. A lot of the discussions on the internet have been, where will this be built? There's very few shipyards that could manage a project like this so big. Really only 2, maybe 3 shipyards in the United States that could. Bath Iron Works, Huntington Ingalls, and Newport News Shipbuilding, which is a kind of an offshoot of Huntington Ingalls. Newport News builds our aircraft carriers, and those can't be offset or delayed to build something of this size. And this will take years to build and tens of billions of dollars. So ultimately, if you ask me, will this be built? We know that the design is very preliminary. When I asked the Navy what their design specifications were, they didn't know. And the graphics that were put on the Golden Fleet website are not finalized and are not indicative of what will actually be on the ship. So given that this design is in such a preliminary stage, and there's so much work to be done, and we have a class of ships, BBGX, that is already kind of farther down the road, I think ultimately we're going to see the Navy pull back on this and say, this is not the design that we need for the threat environment that we're going to be seeing in 5 to 10 years. We're gonna pull back a little bit, kind of overview what we've got, and then continue on with a smaller design. So to answer your question, I think really no. I don't think this is going to get anywhere other than PowerPoints, or maybe it'll start construction, but I don't see this continuing forward all the way to fielded ships that are deployed in the Navy. There's just no way, given the scale, the size, and what the Navy has really focused itself on for the past 10 years. I don't see it happening.
Well, I'm interested in your thoughts on the arguments for and against this specific platform. Let's start with the arguments for.
I think even though I'm kind of not seeing a vision for it, I think there are definitely a lot of arguments for it. It's got a ton of vertical launch cells, which is something the Navy has pushed very hard on that they need. It's the primary weapon for any surface combatant that's looking to go out and fight in a high-end, high-threat environment. If you don't have vertical launch cells, we're talking Tomahawk missiles, surface-to-air missiles that can be launched from ships, anti-submarine rockets, really anything that you can picture being, a cruise missile. Any future cruise missile is going to be vertical launched. And this ship has a lot of them. Not as much as you would expect from something so large with such a heavy displacement, but it's still got a lot more than our destroyers, and it'll be supplementing our cruisers that are being retired into 2027. So there is a shortfall in our vertical launch cell capability on our surface ships, and this is a way to kind of alleviate that drop in that curve that a lot of analysts have recognized as a major point of U.S. Navy kind of shrinking. And that curve is supposed to go up in the 2030s, but this ship could be a good way of supplementing what we have right now with a very large hull that has a lot of growth potential. You can add a lot more VLS cells if you want. You can add some lasers or really anything like that with a hull this size. So I think there is an argument there. You also have the requirement for a cruiser. Ultimately, we're retiring the cruisers in 2027. We've got an interim capability in our Flight 3, our most recent Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, but that's a stopgap. They've been modified to fill the role of a cruiser as the Air Warfare Command Center for any carrier strike group. So something like this could serve as a very capable carrier defense-centric platform. Obviously, there's still some drawbacks. Like I mentioned, the size of it is unprecedented. I think this will be the largest surface warfare ship since World War II. One of the largest of all time. It would exceed any other current ship fielded in any Navy, including what used to be, if this is built, what used to be the largest, the Kirov-class battlecruiser in the Russian Navy. That's one of the huge downsides. It's just how big it is. The second downside is it's not very optimized for its armament. It's a very large hull that really only offers a few benefits from what you would have in DDGX or CGX, which we saw during the Obama administration. It's very under-equipped for how big it is, and that's one of the arguments against it in saying you could have a much smaller ship, half the displacement, half the weight, but still have 90% of the armament and most of what is most core to a surface fleet ship, which is the VLS cells. there's
Does
another.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, there's another argument that a lot of it is untested. A power plant that's diesel and electric, that size, would very much struggle to power what the Navy thinks will be on the ship and what the spec sheet was in the Golden Fleet website. Obviously, that is still preliminary. I'm sure that there will be changes as the time goes on, but right now, there's going to be a lot of questions for the contractors to say, does this need to be nuclear powered, and what does that look like, and how do we build a nuclear powered cruiser or battleship 40, 50 years after the last one? So that's another huge question where there's really no answer. The Navy doesn't know what they're doing. Contractors don't know what they're doing yet. And really, the Trump administration and anyone in the Navy working towards this has put out a top-line list of requirements that are now being worked on lower down, which is a little difficult and might cause some problems in the future. And that's, I think, a good balance of the pros and cons. I think there definitely is an application for this. I think there is certainly a future where a ship like this exists, but the concerns outweigh what benefit there would be, and the alternatives that exist would far outweigh what the ship is.
This sounds more like a request for a proposal than a ship announcement. Like, here's what we'd like to see built. Is that?
Yes, that is very much. And Trump and Secretary of the Navy, they both talked about how this has been in the works. They've been building out the requirements. President Trump said since his first administration. I haven't seen any indication of that. It could be true, and that could mean that this design is a lot more mature than what we know right now. But given the fact that the Navy doesn't have a spec sheet to release that is an official spec sheet, makes me think there's a lot more work to be done. We haven't seen BBGX as a name in any budget, any contracts before December 22nd, if that gives an indication of kind of where things have been. But that doesn't mean that the ship hasn't been under development. So there is a lot of questions, and I think those will be more answered in the months that follow once you start having these big shipbuilders, designers, and shipyards kind of working together and interacting and saying, here's what we can do, here's what we can improve on, and you got to pull something like this back, right? So there's a lot of questions, not a lot of answers right now, but yeah.
Does this say anything about the direction that the Navy is headed?
I would hesitate to say it's going in any one direction. We kind of have a momentum going right now where the Navy wants distributed maritime operations. That's something against China. China fields such a large inventory of long-range missiles and drones and satellites that can track our ships out to thousands of miles away. They're looking for smaller, more agile ships that can bounce around kind of the islands and keep ahead of any threat that exists. Putting them together, they form a much more cohesive strike group, surface force that can defend itself, but you also have the option to disaggregate and scramble any which direction that you want. And that's the direction that the Navy's been looking towards. That's what they've been building out even in engineering projects in the Pacific. This is a completely different direction. This is consolidating a lot of that firepower on a very large hull that would be a very large target for anything that is looking to sink Navy ships. That's why people have argued that carriers are obsolete because of long-range missiles. We know that they aren't. But the same argument could be applied here, saying this will be a huge target, and China is willing to expend more missiles in sinking this than it would for other assets. How does that play out in a war? I couldn't tell you, because the Navy has been adamant they want smaller ships, smaller, more agile surface forces. But is this a step in the right direction? Ultimately, war is a game of whoever is less incorrect about future warfare is going to win. And this is a gamble in the other direction, saying, well, maybe we need more large surface combatants to protect our carriers, consolidate into large air and missile defense teams, rather than having that disaggregated, smaller, more agile force that could potentially be stealthy and maneuver quicker than some of the threats that we can see. So ultimately, I think it's too early. But the direction the Navy is going right now, it is a step in a separate direction. It is a step backwards from what they're working towards.
Dude, the simpleton over here, so it blows my mind how long it takes to build some of these things. And we were talking with Alex Hollings recently of Sandbox, who's a big air power guy, of course, and he was talking about the next generation fighters. and how it's like 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And it's the same thing here. We're like the idea, I mean, even 5 years, which sounds overly optimistic, it like so much changes in 5 years. Like we might have the most advanced battleship in 5 years, but that might not be a measure of success. Like, again, if you go back throughout history, like if you had the fastest horse in 1916, it didn't matter all that much. It's crazy how long some of this stuff takes to put together.
Yeah, and that's going to be one of the biggest issues with this ship. Such a big hull. If they're looking for armor that a battleship has, this will take nearly as long as what an aircraft carrier takes to build, and that is almost a decade of time of first steel cutting to having it launched and in the water and commissioned. This will take a monumental effort from whatever shipyard builds this ship. It could be multiple across the country, sending parts in by rail. That's going to cause a lot of problems if any part is delayed or has issues or has quality control problems. We're talking, almost a decade beyond just finishing the design, which is something that the Navy is going to want to do given how many problems they've had with incomplete designs. We saw that with Constellation class, potentially also with this new frigate that's been announced. We don't know yet. And the Navy's going to really want to hammer in this design, make sure they have everything spick and span before they start construction and lay down the first parts of the hull. That assumes it even makes it to construction. Like you said, in 15 years, the threat environment could be a lot different. What do we see in the future that could impact this ship's ability to defend itself or project power? There's a lot of questions. And the Navy's kind of been gambling on that smaller fleet, more agile fleet to make up for any difference that they could see in the future. Things like hypersonic missiles, ballistic missiles, all these things that are really coming online now in large numbers are going to be even more prevalent in 10 years. They're going to be mass-produced by multiple countries. Where do you see the ship in that environment? It's a question for whoever takes the lead on this. I think recently it was Gibbs and Cox, the major ship designer, that's going to take the lead on building this with the Navy in charge. That's going to be a question for them to answer, and it's going to be hard to answer because it's so hard to determine what we're going to see in 10 years. Ukraine showed us things evolve so quickly that it is impossible to predict what could happen even tomorrow. So planning something out this far with a design that's really unproven, right? We know aircraft carriers work, so we can build them iteratively. A battleship like this hasn't been built in almost 100 years. So where do we see this fitting in with a threat environment that is 15 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road? Huge question that I think needs to be answered by the Navy and by any ship builder and designer that's working on this ship. And I think there's going to be a lot of questions for them as we move forward of where this kind of fits in to the current Navy strategy.
It's crazy when you think about it. Like we have to plan, we have to build, we have to be ready for future threats. But we don't know what those are, and you run the risk of building something for the last war that is obsolete as soon as the again. I think the great example here, right, is battleships in World War II.
Yes,
and so, I don't know. It's daunting to think about this, but one of the arguments I've seen recently in recent years is that we need to increase our shipbuilding capacity. So in the Carter Johnson ideal world here, I mean, this potentially is a way that we're increasing that capacity.
Definitely.
We're building more ships.
Yeah.
But in your perfect world, is there another ship or another platform we could be building out right now that would help increase that capacity?
I think there's a lot, but it's hard. A lot of our shipyards are very small, and that doesn't count kind of the state-owned or nationally owned shipyards that serve as the intermediate maintenance facilities, kind of your quick repairs that are when you're forward deployed. Our shipyards are very, very inadequate for something like this, especially if we want to build 25. I think that was the high-end number that was predicted. There needs to be billions of dollars invested for something like this, and I think, like you said, there are alternatives. That we've got unmanned ships coming. We know that is on the horizon. The Navy is working on building their squadrons and working out what that would look like in a fleet. Those are a bit more tasked towards our smaller shipyards that are less known nationally. There are a lot of them. A lot of them build these private ships. You could be building hulls for unmanned boats, unmanned ships, and you could ship them across the country to big yards for fitting out. I think that's an option. But really finding a third source beyond Huntington Ingalls and beyond Bath Ironworks for these large surface combatants is almost impossible without straight up funding them to build a new yard, finding that talent in a state where there might not be much. Saw that in Wisconsin, Mississippi, California. It's hard. Shipbuilding is a hard thing in the United States, and it goes beyond just having a backlog or an inventory that you want to build. We have that. We have a backlog of dozens of ships that are waiting to be built that could be built elsewhere. We don't have any yards that can do it. All the yards that we do have are maxed out, and they can't expand production because you don't have the workforce. So initiatives that are starting, they were just starting in the 2019, 2020 timeline right before COVID, are really hitting the ground running now. And I think that is what we'll be looking for in the future to build our shipbuilding potential rather than a large ship or any sort of solution by just adding more ships to what is already, dozens or even hundreds of ships that the Navy's looking for. That's like, apprentice programs, things like that would really help the workforce in states that are heavy on shipbuilding. Maine, Mississippi, California, Hawaii, places even like as Japan, where other countries are helping us, South Korea, other countries are helping us now stand up our shipbuilding and ship repair capability. Hanwha and Philly Shipyard, that is a historic deal. I think reopening of that shipyard, having to build frigates, great step in the right direction. How can you do that everywhere else to really bring back our shipbuilding capability, but also the workforce that makes it all happen? Because ultimately it is the workers. It's the welders, pipe fitters, everyone that works in that shipyard that makes everything work. Without them, you could have a backlog of 1,000 ships, none will be built. I think that is the bottom line, Carter-Johnston, perfect situation where we have a government that is willing to invest billions of dollars into building our workforce, rebuilding a military sealift command, our ready reserve force that is at an all-time low that we depend on in the Pacific. All these things could really come together and help us build a powerhouse shipbuilding industry that could even rival, a place like China. That would take decades. But if we start now, we get the ball rolling. Who knows what could happen? I mean, there are Americans that are willing to do that for us. They already do it. And I'm sure that there are more that would be willing to take competitive wages, right? A shipyard right now, those workers make less than minimum wage that you would at McDonald's. That is right there, criminal. Got to build that up. Build up the workforce. You've got more people to work on ships. You can start getting more shifts done, and that entire industry can uplift itself into something way better than it is right now. That is my perfect world. I don't think these ships fulfill that exact requirement and need. And I don't think these will be built at all, so they're not really going anywhere with that. That is my final analysis of what's going on. And I know that was a lot to unpack, but I'm very passionate about the shipyards.
I didn't know we were going to get into a campaign speech there. That platform you're running on is impressive. Maybe one day. We'll see. For the American electorate that is hyper fixated on shipbuilding, you got him.
I got the 1% of the vote that matters. I've got the 1%
might be high there.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So the last question here is, what are you watching for in this space, specifically around this battleship cruiser announcement? What do you have your eye on here in the next couple days, weeks, or months?
I'm looking for a requirement set from the Navy. When I emailed them that first day, they got me the renderings, they got me the design proposal, and kind of what they saw in that first rendering that we saw in Palm Beach at Mar-a-Lago. But there's nothing from the Navy that says, here are our ironed down requirements, we've nailed it to the wall, and this is what we're working with. They don't know that yet. And that is the biggest thing that I'm going to be looking for, is kind of knowing what's going to be on this ship. I think we have the renderings. The renderings, great indication of kind of that high level thing of what they're looking for. But the detailed overview of, here are the weapons that we have. It's going to be powered by this power plant, and we're going to need this many of them. we've had this laser equipped, and we know it'll be powered because we've done the math. That is the first step in saying, all right, they're serious about this. Maybe it can work. But if we don't get that, I don't think this is a serious proposal at all. I think we will get it, and I think it'll kind of eclipse beyond that just design overview of here's what we want, and this is what we're going to build, into the, all right, now how do we build a hull around this? How do we make sure it's seaworthy and we can man it and it's small enough to build in a yard? That's what I'm looking for in the short term. Medium term, who's starting and medium term, mind you, is maybe early 2030s. Who's building the ship? Who's been awarded that ship? I don't know who would win it. They're looking at Huntington Ingalls, Pascagoula, Mississippi, and they're looking at Bath Iron Works too, in the Northeast. That's the next step is who's going to build this ship. And once you know that, you know what workforce you're working with, you know how fast it's going to go, you know how much industry they can pull from, what metalworking teams they can pull from. These are all questions that are going to be answered in years. And I will be long gone. Who knows what I'll be doing once that happens? But we know now that they want to build a ship. That's what we know. That's all we know. So now you need the design review, everything that goes into the ship, know what you want, and then awarding the ship, who's going to build it. And then that is when we get to the real meat and potatoes of, okay, the ship's being built. Ultimately, what delays are there? What isn't working? And what do they have to redesign? Which is what we've seen with almost every shipbuilding program the U.S. Navy's had in the past 20 years, save one or two. So those are the things that I'm looking for in the future. And the future is a very long time, because with shipbuilding, like you said, it takes years. It takes decades. There's a lot of questions.
Now, you said you're going to be long gone by the early 2030s. To clarify, you're talking about like maybe a different job or doing something different, and like you're still going to be here, right?
I'll definitely. I'll be here. Don't worry.
Okay.
But what will I be writing about? What will I be focusing on? I don't know if it'll be this battleship. There's a lot more going on out there.
You'll be talking about the replacement
exactly.
of the replacement for this one.
Yes, yeah. Yes. They will. Ultimately, I think they're going to go back to their original design proposal, BBGX, and it's going to be delayed because they've kind of taken their foot off the gas with this battleship design that the administration has really pushed for. You're also going to have problems with the frigate. Frigate's very much underarmed. They're going to go back maybe to the old design. I don't know. It all depends on what administration comes in 2028. And I think that'll be the big focus is, has the Navy moved in the right direction? And potentially, why have they won or why have they lost that future war that everyone's kind of looking towards right now? And that is really a question that we should be asking ourselves is this the right ship for what we have coming in 5-10 years from now? And I think if you look at the DOW's China Maritime and Defense report that was put out yesterday, there's a lot more worry coming out from the Department of Defense that points us towards we need something now rather than in 10 years. And so is this ship the right fit? That's what I'll be looking at and kind of looking back and saying, wow, when I talked with Preston about this ship, we knew it was coming, and now it's happened, and now everyone's shocked. How did this happen? That's the kind of thing that I think I'll be looking at in 10 years from now when the ship is built or not built. And we've got a lot of time between now and then. A lot can change. Maybe things can go right. Maybe we'll see battleships going through New York Harbor in 2040. I personally don't think that's going to happen. I really don't. So ultimately, that's my last thought, is that nothing much is happening with this ship.
Carter, you're awesome, man. Really appreciate you breaking this down and taking the time. This was levels beyond anything I understood coming in. So super
no
helpful,
problem.
man. Really
I'm happy to help any way I can. And certainly talking about battleships is never boring. And the surface fleet is lucky to have this, or unlucky. We'll find out. Absolutely happy to help.
So this is one of my favorite types of interviews, where I went into it thinking I was going to learn about, some new capabilities on these Trump-class warships, but instead, my big takeaway is how far behind we are when it comes to American shipbuilding. Like, I knew it was bad. I didn't realize it was that bad, and how much is going to be needed to actually get us back to a place where we can realistically be building something like this in a relatively short period of time. I don't know. That was not very optimistic. The optimistic thing is Carter's passion, right? And clearly the guy's doing the right type of work here. Hopefully he's got the ear of people that can actually put some of this stuff into action. I mean, it seems like more shipbuilding in the U.S. could be a relatively bipartisan issue. Seems like something a lot of people could get on board with. So who knows? Maybe this announcement of the Trump battleship actually kind of leads to that conversation. Maybe a year or two down the road, people are saying, where is this thing? I thought we were supposed to have it. And it prompts the conversation that Carter just hit on. We can't do it right now, even if we wanted to. I feel like that's important and probably needs a bit more attention than it's getting. Of course, be sure to follow Carter, all of his work on X and navalnews.com. Those will be linked in the description below. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.